CBS News' latest Battleground Tracker poll shows a tight race in Iowa. The top 4 candidates are all within the margin of error among likely Democratic caucus goers. Support for Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and former Vice President Joe Biden is virtually unchanged from last month's poll. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren dropped a bit, but she is still the top second choice in Iowa. South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg saw the largest gain. He rose 7 points since last month. Antoine Seawright, Eugene Scott, and Larry Sabato join me now. Antoine is a CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist. Eugene is a reporter covering politics at the Washington Post, and Larry is the director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. Antoine, let me start with you. Buttigieg's support has tripled in Iowa since September. CBS News recontacts voters for this study, and most of his supporters chose Elizabeth Warren as their first choice last month. We know Buttigieg's campaign has been spending a lot of time and money in Iowa, so should we see these gains as a result of that?
Well, I want to be consistent with my thought from being around this business for 15 years is that polls are a snapshot of the time. What that tells me that what you just said was that these are people who made up their mind. Perhaps they are not pro-Joe Biden, the front runner, but they chose Pete or Elizabeth Warren as their alternative. That's okay. But I should also note that these polls may change again. And I think Pete's long-term investments in Iowa and his groundswell of staff and offices is paying dividends for him, and the fact that he perhaps has made the most investments in Iowa to this point, and you can contribute that or credit that to his large fundraising hauls he's had every quarter.
So when you look at the picture among the 18 early primary and caucus states, Buttigieg is sitting at just 9% support. That translates to only 23 delegates using our pre-election estimate. So, Larry, what does that tell you about the work Buttigieg may need to do in other states?
Well, he has a lot of work to do, obviously, but their idea clearly is what other candidates have seen in past cycles, that once he wins Iowa, he's the current front runner, there's no question about it. If he wins Iowa, then he goes into New Hampshire, potentially could win that, even though there are 2 candidates from New England, Warren and Sanders, and then goes into Nevada and South Carolina as an underdog. He's unlikely to win them despite momentum from Iowa and New Hampshire. Why? Because Iowa is 91% white and New Hampshire is 93% white, and Buttigieg's support is overwhelmingly white. So it all fits together. Biden obviously draws from minorities, as do some other candidates, and they're going to do much better in Nevada and South Carolina.
Okay, so Eugene, let's do a deep dive into some of that. Because when you break down early state support by race and ethnicity, as Larry just did a little bit there, Buttigieg is clearly lagging behind the other top candidates with black voters. Why is he doing so badly among African Americans, and how concerned should his campaign be about that?
Well, I've spoken with people on his campaign, and they are concerned, and they believe that they are putting in place tools and other programs perhaps to improve his standing with black voters. But there are a few reasons why the Buttigieg campaign is doing so poorly with black voters, particularly compared to his opponents. Many black voters do not know who Pete Buttigieg is. Even still, he's a new name, and he doesn't have a political career that was built in a place that has a sizable black population. His political career was also built in a place where quite a few people who are black in South Bend actually have quite a few problems with how Buttigieg has been a mayor, and they've been very vocal in their criticism of him. And so these 2 things, more than anything else, really help put him in a position that make it very difficult for him to improve his status with these voters.
Yeah, Larry, sorry. Yeah, I mean, just to elaborate on that point, Eugene, we did see, I guess it was over the summer, there was a police-related shooting in his, in the town where he's the mayor, South Bend, and he didn't handle it particularly well, and that did cost him, didn't it?
It absolutely did cost him, and just in the past week, he's found himself with another situation related to black voters in South Carolina, where the campaign allegedly said they had support from people that they actually did not have support from. And what it suggests is that the Buttigieg campaign does not have the inroads with the black community to address the issues that these individuals, these voters, care about deeply as quickly as he needs to turn that criticism or doubt of him into support.
Right. Okay. And Larry, I want to ask you about what happened over the weekend with the Louisiana governor's election. Democrat John Bel Edwards won re-election. And so what can we actually take away from the Democrats winning governor's races in Louisiana and Kentucky, you know, pretty solidly red states, but Democrats winning there?
Sure, and obviously Trump will in all likelihood win both of them next year. But here's the lesson from it, and I think Democrats were paying attention. To do better in the South and the border states, and the Democrats have been doing of late, they need to nominate candidates who fit the territory. And that means in the case of John Bel Edwards, he's pro-Second Amendment, he's pro-life on abortion. In other words, he is much more moderate or even conservative than most Democrats are. And what I found interesting is Democrats got it. People seem to think that, you know, it's a party of wild liberals and they insist on everybody believing every single thing they believe. No, the turnouts in some of the most liberal areas of Louisiana were outstanding, were very strong and overwhelming for John Bel Edwards. That's a good sign for Democrats.
And as Antoine will tell you, you know, that's because the Democratic Party is the big tent party, right, Antoine? And so there's a variety of views established there. But this is my question. When does it start to become so to the center right that you're actually running almost as a Republican?
Sorry, let me say a few things about Kentucky and Louisiana. Here's some consistent nuggets that came out of both of them. One, the candidates were able to localize the election and make it about their particular state issues and not get caught up in the national narrative that the Republicans try to bring us in every single election. Number two, we were able to maximize African-American turnout in both of those races. You cannot be the Democratic nominee, and we cannot win any race unless we maximize the most loyal voting bloc in our party, African-American voters. The third thing we were able to do was drive a wedge on the issues that Republicans have really failed the country on, and starting with health care. Health care was the consistent calling card that Democrats were able to capitalize on in Kentucky and Louisiana. When you couch that with persuasion and being able to turn out voters, that's why we had success. I don't buy into this idea that we have to necessarily cuddle and play footsie with the right-wing narrative to win elections. I think we have to focus on the issues at hand, turn out our base of voters, and keep chipping away at suburban and urban voters where we lost in 2016, and I think we'll be well positioned in the future.
All right, Antoine, we know you have to go, so Antoine Seawright, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And the rest of you, stick with me, please, because on Friday, former President Barack Obama appeared to suggest that voters could be turned off by policy proposals that are too bold, saying Americans, quote, like seeing things improved, but the average American doesn't think we have to completely tear down the system and remake it. He continued, even as we push the envelope and we are bold in our vision, we also have to be rooted in reality and the fact that voters are not driven by the same views that are reflected on certain left-leaning Twitter feeds or the activist wing of our party. So, Eugene, why do you think we're hearing this from the former president now?
Well, one reason we're hearing this is despite what conservative critics of President Obama say, he really is a centrist. He's a moderate Democrat. And so the idea that he's a radical and would align with some of the more radical ideas that we hear coming on the campaign trail isn't one based on fact. He's an individual who wants the election to end with a Democratic victory. And he believes that the majority of people in this country are more moderate than on the extremes. And when it comes to Democrats being on the progressive extreme. And so I imagine he has watched the polls and seen success coming from candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and wants to guide and direct the party and the candidates towards the values that perhaps are more consistent with the Bidens, with the Buttigiegs, and perhaps other candidates who think more like Obama politically.
Right. And Eugene, over the weekend, former New York City mayor and possible presidential candidate, we still don't know yet, Michael Bloomberg, apologized for one of his most well-known policies, stop and frisk. Now, that was a New York police tactic that critics argue led to racial profiling. So here's part of his apology. Let's listen.
Now, hindsight is 20/20. But as crime continued to come down as we reduced stops, and as it continued to come down during the next administration, to its credit, I now see that we could and should have acted sooner and acted faster to cut the stops. I wish we had. I'm sorry that we didn't. But I can't change history. However, today, I want you to know that I realized back then I was wrong. And I'm sorry.
And Eugene, you have a piece out today headlined, quote, apologizing for stop and frisk is only a first step if Bloomberg wants to win black voters. Walk us through why that is and what else Bloomberg would have to do to win over the African-American vote.
Well, one of the big challenges that Bloomberg is facing with his apology for stop and frisk is that he says he supported it back then. The reality is he supported it as recently as January 2019. And so the idea that this is a policy or a value that he's moved away from, years ago isn't one supported by the facts. We know other candidates seeking the Democratic nomination, including Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton years ago, had to apologize for the policies and ideas they supported that led to the increased incarceration of people of color. However, that was not enough for the voters. They wanted to see new policies supported that would reverse the past wrongs that these politicians backed. And so if Bloomberg wants to get the support from black and Latino voters, support he likely will need if he's going to capture the nomination, he's going to have to do more than say, I'm sorry. He's going to show what he has done that will reverse the harms done by stop and frisk.
And Larry, do you think we should take Bloomberg's apology as a sign that he's going to run?
Oh, I think there were plenty of signs of that even before he did it. Look, this is traditional. Candidates go on apology tours. If they've had a long history in politics and they've done things that don't sit well with key constituencies today, they want to get it over with quickly, and they're absolutely right to try to do so. Sometimes it isn't possible. But if you're going to apologize, and now Bloomberg has done it not just for stop and frisk, but also to women for some of the very critical sexist things he's said over the years. He's not the kind of guy who normally apologizes. We all know that. He's very loath to apologize, say I'm sorry for anything. The fact that he's doing this, has given 2 apologies so far, tells me that he's really serious about running. Now, whether he'll do well, he's worth $51 billion, but other than that, he's got a long way to climb up Mount Everest if he's going to actually do well in this race.
Well, he seemed to have done everything but officially throw his hat into the ring at this point. So that's, one last thing we're waiting for is for him just to announce it. All right, well, Eugene Scott and Larry Sabato, thanks to both of you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tanya.